Hi, this is David Wood, and welcome back to Wood on Words, the podcast for writers and publishers. This is episode 3, Choosing Your Path to Publication. It's been a busy few days since the last episode. I'm recording this on Friday. You guys probably won't get it until Monday or Tuesday. I'm having to take care of it early because I'll be traveling, going to Thriller Fest, which is the annual gathering for international thriller writers. I haven't been in a few years. Looking forward to catching up with some friends, maybe doing some interviews. It's always a good time. In my writing life, I am continuing working on the Book of Bones, which is the serial story that I'm publishing on my website, davidwoodweb.com, and getting ready for the launch of Blood Codex, a thriller I co-authored with Alan Baxter. So all that's good stuff. Also, just a couple of days ago, I was a guest on the Dead Robot Society podcast, where we talked about writing action and adventure. That was a lot of fun. I'll probably elaborate on that on this podcast quite a ways down the road. I'll break it up into a few episodes and go into greater depth, but that's going to be a while because I want to get through the Indie Publishing Success Workshop first. So if you want to go ahead and check it out, it's deadrobotssociety.com. And I'll probably forget to put that link in the show notes, but I will try to remember. Now today, as we're walking through the beginning steps that any writer takes, we want to talk about choosing your path to publication. A number of years ago, actually not all that long ago in the big picture, there really was only one real path, which was find an agent, find a publisher who would publish you. There were small variations to it, but that was pretty much the standard way. And with the advent of print on demand, ebooks, and even access to independently publishing audiobooks, you've got some great options now. For today, I'm going to be speaking in very general terms. There will be exceptions to every rule, no need to nitpick. I'm going to talk about 3 broad categories: corporate publishing, small press publishing, and independent publishing. Now, corporate publishing is what most people would consider traditional publishing. Some people say that traditional publishing is anyone who is being published by someone else and following the so-called traditional publishing model. But for the most part, traditional publishing is what we think of as being published by the big 5 publishing houses, the major ones. Now, there are some advantages to this, obviously. First of all, this is the avenue that's most likely to put you in bookstores. It's probably going to be the one that could get you into Walmart, Target, put you in the airport shops, on the grocery store racks. That's absolutely your best bet for anything in terms of paperback and hardcover publication. On average, if you're taking the median publisher in corporate publishing, or the median book, and compare it to the median small press book or median indie book, it's going to be the best quality by far. It's going to have the best editing at the various stages. It's going to be the best proofed and formatted, probably have the best cover. They will market it better than anyone else will and give you the widest distribution. Now, as we said at the beginning, these are not hard and fast rules, but we're talking about, on average, your typical middle-of-the-road book for each of these categories. This avenue gives you the potential to reach the most readers, in part because you've got that publisher identity, where people might take a chance on you if they see that you're published by a big house. You might get endorsed by some of the bigger authors within that publishing house, but mostly it's because of the opportunity to get into bookstores and get that wide print audience. You're probably going to get the largest advances before publication from corporate publishing. Many small presses don't pay any advance at all. Some do, some pay a good bit, but again, talking about the average, this is probably where you're going to get the most upfront money. I'm told that advances are shrinking. I know people who sold a trilogy and got a $9,000 advance for the entire thing. So we're still not talking a lot of money unless you're the exception. Although some people still are making pretty good advances. It just depends. When you're talking about things like awards, membership into professional organizations, making public appearances, being guests at cons, signing in bookstores, getting reviews from a lot of places, corporate publishing, as we're calling it, is going to have the fewest barriers. Some professional organizations won't take anyone who is not from a recognized market. On the positive side, that's changing in some ways. Some organizations will take independent authors if they reach certain sales benchmarks. Others will take authors who are with certain recognized small publishers. Many awards won't consider anything that's not from a big publishing house. Book review sites, many will not consider independently published books or small press books. And for the most part, that one is understandable because there are so many independently published writers out there, so many small presses out there, that an open submission policy for a reviewer just overwhelms them. So just to keep themselves sane and to manage their reviews, many will only review corporately published books. Bookstore signings, public appearances can be the same, although not always. Typically, I'll see conventions that are happy to have independently published authors as guests, although not all. But you're more likely to be a guest of honor or you get a different level of treatment when you're a successful corporately published author. This is probably going to be your best opportunity to sell a lot of foreign language rights. You can do it as an indie or a small press, but it's a tougher road. You don't always get as good a deal. I'm told, although I haven't had this experience, that you're more likely to sell an option for a movie or television if you're corporately published. This is arguably the greatest level of prestige. It's one thing for some little run-of-the-mill ebook publisher to slap a crappy cover on your book and publish it under their house name. It's another to make it through all the steps and to reach the standard that a corporate publishing house will accept you. So for a lot of people, they consider that prestigious. And for them, it's an important external validation, especially for someone who is insecure about their own writing, someone who might not be commercially successful, but is proud of their achievement on an artistic level. For some people, it's just a bucket list item. They'd like to sell one book to a corporate publisher. At times, I feel like that's a bucket list item for me. I've sold to small press, but I really haven't made many attempts to sell to corporate publishing because the indie publishing has had so many advantages for me that right now pursuing a corporate deal isn't really worth my time and definitely isn't the best way to support my family. But that day could come, and it might be fun to check it off my bucket list, but for me, it's not a priority. Now let's talk about the downsides to corporate publishing. First of all, there are a lot of barriers to entry just to get your book, your manuscript looked at and to be published. Typically, you need to be represented by an agent. Some publishing houses will have open submission periods or will have an open slush pile. I've seen some where their policy is, go ahead and submit this to us, and if you don't hear from us in 90 days, we're not interested. It's possible to navigate the slush pile and get seen by an editor, maybe even get an offer. Not nearly as likely as if you are represented by an agent. So your first stage is going to be just going through the process of finding an agent who is even interested in representing you. The agent then begins the query process to try to get editors who will look at your books, and then they're going to have to go through find an editor who believes in it. The editor will then have to basically sell that book to the company, get them to invest in it, and then you keep going. So it's much tougher to get published. Well, I mean, obviously, independently published, you can do whatever you want. Small presses, it just depends. A lot of small presses are very discerning because they have limited, their finances are limited, they have limited publishing slots, they take it very seriously. So don't operate under the assumption that a small press is going to be easier to get published by, although it's usually easier to submit to them. Another consideration with corporate publishing is that there are absolutely no guarantees. Bookstore shelf space is very limited. First of all, bookstores, there are fewer of them. Chains are dying off. You go into your local bookstores, you see more and more spaces devoted to toys and collectibles, coffee shops, things like that. And I enjoy those things too. So there's a finite amount of space, and even within just corporate publishing, there are many more books being published than the bookstore has shelf space for, not to mention the backlist of popular authors. If you want to try to keep one of every Stephen King book on your shelf, that's a huge section of shelf space for one guy. So best-selling authors, established authors, they're going to get the most shelf space. If you're a new author, from what I'm told, you probably will get a very brief time on the shelves. It's not a guarantee, but they'll probably give you a chance. But if you don't start selling right away, it's probably going to dry up very quickly. I've known some authors who signed a multi-book deal. The first book came out just for a few weeks. It didn't take off immediately, so the publisher chose not to even do a print copy of the subsequent books. So again, just because the potential is there for bookstore placement and reaching a wide audience, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. Also, in terms of marketing, while a publisher will almost certainly do more for you than a small house or that you can do for yourself as an indie, although not necessarily, most of their money for marketing is going to be invested in their top best-selling authors. Displays up front in bookstores, those are going to be for the big people. And that might seem counterintuitive because it's the small writers who need the most support, but realistically, these big superstar authors are generating the revenue that allows these publishing houses to take a chance on new writers. And so they're pouring more marketing money into their, big revenue generators because those lift everyone else up. So there's no guarantee that you're going to get very much promotion. We talked about editorial support. Well, it's true that on average you're going to get better editors, but I am hearing more and more from friends of mine whose traditional publisher is pairing them with a freelance author. Some of them are still excellent. Some of them are not so great. So, again, another area where there are no guarantees. Now, a big difference is because corporate publishing offers the potential for selling many copies, particularly in print, you're going to get pennies on your royalties. You might get 10, 15 cents on a paperback sale. So you've got to sell many, many, many more books as a corporately published author to come anywhere close to what you could make as an indie author. And so there's just not a lot of revenue there unless you really hit it big time in corporate publishing. Corporate publisher is going to probably put a higher retail price on your ebooks. And there's, again, that balancing act. As an indie, you can set a lower price, move more units. But with corporate publishing, because your royalty is such a small percentage of your cover price, they need to set it higher to give you anything at all. Although in fairness, a reader is more likely to take a chance on a high-priced, corporately published book than they are an indie, if they even realize your book is indie. Another thing to consider is that your payments are going to be few and far between. You'll get some sort of advance, typically small, especially if you're new, and that's going to be broken up into 3 or maybe even 4 parts. The most typical thing is that when contracts are signed on both sides, you'll sign them, send them back, and whenever they get around to signing their end, you will then be promised a check that will come at some point in the future. Then, when the editor has sent you back the edits on your book, you complete them, it goes back and forth, and the editor gives your manuscript final approval. You will then be promised another portion of your advance. And then, in most cases, your final payment will come at some point after your book has actually hit the shelves. Now, after that, you don't get any money until your books have sold enough that the royalties you are owed exceed what your advance is. And also consider that because bookstores are allowed to return books, your publisher will hold back a portion of your royalties in reserve against the possibility of books that bookstores have paid them for being returned to them having to send that money back again. So that's one of the disadvantages there, is that you don't get a lot of money. The payments are spread out. Royalties typically come quarterly once you start earning them, and they're usually pretty small. Reality check. Most corporately published authors don't make a living from their published work. You can say that about any author at any level. but that is something that surprises a lot of people. Your favorite mid-list authors, odds are they either have a day job, they have a partner or spouse who works, they supplement their income with indie publishing or maybe writing under a pen name, or they might even crowdfund. N.K. Jemisin, a well-known fantasy author who's had a lot of success, has multiple titles to her credit, recently set up, I think it was a Patreon account, because she would love to quit her day job. Now, this is an author I would have thought, even knowing the realities of the publishing industry, would have thought was making a living, but she's just not. And you'll sometimes see authors who do all of those things. I think one of the saddest things for me is when a corporately published author is asking for crowdfunding money. That is very discouraging to me. You'd think that they could leverage the audience that they've garnered and the publicity they've garnered and the credibility that they've gained through corporate publishing into some degree of independently published success, but not all do. So, again, you're not likely to make a living, although it's like buying a lottery ticket. You can't win if you don't play. It could happen. So, that's something to think about. Don't think, I'm going to sell a manuscript and quit my day job. Not likely to happen, at least not right away. But the same is true for the other paths that we're going to talk about. Your royalty reports typically come quarterly, although a lot of publishers are lax about sending them. Hopefully, your agent will give you a better report. And that's something I didn't mention, is that if you're represented with an agent, which is the most likely arrangement when you're corporately published, the agent will also take a cut of your royalties before sending on the remainder to you and will report to you often. So that's another thing that cuts down on your revenue there. Contract terms are a big consideration, especially with corporate publishing. Corporate publishing is beginning to adapt to the new marketplace. They're beginning to recognize things such as the reality that a new book can lift an author's backlist, as opposed to the long-time belief that an author's new book competes with his or her other titles. But in general, most of the contracts being offered still contain some very onerous terms. Lifetime ownership of your work, or just ridiculously long contract terms. Very vague, what we call in-print clauses, or out-of-print clauses that prevent you getting your rights back if the publisher isn't supporting your book anymore. Some publishing houses will not be printing your book in print anymore. They might not have exploited your audio rights, but as long as there's an overpriced ebook out there somewhere, they'll say, hey, the book is in print, so we get to keep this book. Non-compete clauses. These are things that will set a specific amount of time, and they can come in different shapes or sizes, but typically it will prevent you from writing and publishing another book under your name that's in a similar or related genre. And it's really up to your publisher's discretion sometimes just how broad those terms are. So if you're one of those authors who's trying to leverage corporate publishing for the publicity and the audience reach, and then actually making a living with indie publishing, you need to be careful about those non-compete clauses. I know some authors who have had no problem negotiating that out. Others have, found it very difficult, even when they have shown the data to their editors and publishing houses that prove that putting out one book will help the sale of another. So watch out for non-compete clauses. So if you pursue corporate publishing, familiarize yourself with typical publishing clauses, what they mean, and try to negotiate out some of the ones that don't match your goals. And also, don't count on your agent to understand what some of these contract clauses mean. Some do. Some will pay attention to them. But some do not. I know some people who actually recommend that you get an intellectual property attorney to review any contract you're offered above and beyond what your agent does. Another thing to consider is that corporate publishing moves at a glacial pace compared to other avenues. Takes, as we said, a long time to find an agent, a long time to even get published. But even once that happens, getting the book ready involves a lot of back and forth. Then they have to work it into the calendar, and sometimes they will spread your release dates out artificially when they don't need to be that far apart because of that belief I mentioned that one book competes with another. Now, That's not 100% true. I know some authors who have sold, say, a trilogy, and the publisher has adopted an aggressive release strategy just to see what it works. But in general, prepare for everything to take a very, very long time in corporate publishing. Your next option is going with a small press. Now, small press publishing houses can range from the really nice top echelon publishers that will give you just about everything a corporate publishing house will, they're just fantastic, all the way down to tiny little micro presses or publishers that aren't even real publishers, and everything in between. So for this section, we're just going to talk about your average middle of the road small press publisher. Now, first of all, the barriers to entry are lower. It's pretty rare that a small press will require representation from an agent. And even some of those that typically do will have an open submission period, maybe once a year even. Every stage of the publishing process is going to move a lot faster. Your royalties per copy sold are going to be higher than in corporate publishing. And like a corporate publisher, if your small press is legitimate, they're going to cover the cost of professional editing, of cover design. They're going to absorb any publication costs. And they're ideally going to give you some kind of marketing. It's probably not going to be anything near what you'd get with corporate publishing if you get a marketing budget, but they should give you some level of support. You should hopefully get access to an already established audience. One press that springs to mind is Severed Press. They're not huge, and they also only publish a narrow range of subject matter. There are like 3 things that they do, but they do them very well. And because they do those things so well and are really focused with their content, they have developed a brand identity. And they have cultivated an audience who knows and likes what Severed Press does. Consequently, if you are able to be published through them, if they accept your book and publish it, you've got immediate access to the people who know they like Severed Press's stuff. So there's a certain level of validation, and you can adopt a certain level of their brand identity. I had a discussion online with some authors who were arguing over author brand, and that's something we'll explore in a later episode. But one of the authors was insistent that author brand doesn't matter, just right. And the author said, I've never done anything to try to develop a brand. But that author, most of his stuff was with Severed Press, and Severed Press has a strong brand. So while that particular individual might not have cultivated a personal brand, his work still has a brand because it has the Severed Press brand. And he's probably unintentionally developed some branding through the subject matter about which he writes. So in an ideal situation, you're going to get some of that validation, some of that brand identity, and access to an audience through a small press. Downsides of small press. Most of the small presses you encounter won't really offer you much or even anything that you can't do for yourself. If you're inclined to do it, if you have the aptitude, if you're willing to work hard enough, and you're willing to invest your own money in your publishing career. A lot of good writers are not interested in doing all that, and for them, a small press is a valid choice. Royalties per copy, while they are better than corporate publishing, they're still going to be lower than what they would be in indie publishing because the publisher is taking their cut in return for being your publisher and doing all the things that a publisher should do. So you're sacrificing, again, probably half of your potential royalty, maybe 60%, in exchange for the publishing services they offer and for you not having to invest your own money in your career. Small presses fail a lot, even ones that have been around for a little bit. So do your research. It's great if you can get in with one who's been around for a while, or at least look and see if they seem to know what they're doing. Do they have good cover art? Are their prices reasonable? Are some authors of whom you've actually heard signing with them? Are you hearing good things? Look at Writer Beware, for example, and other online forums. There's no excuse for not doing your research. Sometimes a well-informed writer will still find themselves in a bad situation, but usually the information is out there, which leads me to a warning. Many small presses are scams. Some of them are vanity publishing in disguise. They're going to charge you money Or they're going to sell you with this line that, well, normally we charge, but for you, we're going to make an exception because we love your work. They shouldn't charge. They're not legit if they charge or if they normally charge. They should be doing it all for you in exchange for the share of the royalties you take. So many are, like I said, fronts for vanity presses. There was one that was discussed at length on Chuck Wendig's blog recently where they were charging just ridiculous thousands of dollars and making very vague promises about what they could do for you. Mostly they were selling hope rather than becoming a legitimate publisher. And they were charging thousands of dollars on the front end for their services, and then they were also going to take your royalties on the back end. Do your research. Watch out for bad small press situations. And also, a lot of small presses are just ebook mills. They'll take just about anyone. They'll slap a mediocre cover on the front, put them out as an ebook, and send you your share of what little comes in. Yeah, maybe that's the way you want to go. I don't really see the value in that. So start working on understanding what the Amazon rankings mean, how many books that means they sell. And when you're considering a small press, look at their catalog. Do the covers look good? Are the prices in line with the best-selling books in that genre, in ebook, at least the best-selling indie books? And what are the rankings like for the authors at this house? Basically, I'm going to give you just a very broad strokes. If a book on Kindle is holding a consistent rank of, say, 60,000 to 100,000, they're probably selling one book a day. And I'm talking Kindle US here. You get a little higher than that, it's 2 books a day. When you get up to around 10,000, that's about 10 books a day. You get up to 1,000, that's 100 books a day. You get up to the top 100, they're probably selling 1,000 copies a day. There are caveats to these rankings, and that is that while it's a snapshot mostly reflecting what you're selling that day, it considers yesterday to a certain degree, the day before to a lesser degree, and the day before that to an even lesser degree. About 4 to 5 days back or somewhere around that, maybe even a week. Nobody knows exactly how the secret sauce is made, but it's inaccurate to say that the ranking only reflects that day. And also, the fewer copies a book sells, the more volatile the ranking is. Even if your book is selling nothing and hasn't sold for a month, if you sell one copy, it'll jump probably somewhere into the 100,000s for a short while. There's a lot of misinformation about Amazon rankings. Some people will tell you that the number of reviews a book has directly impacts your ranking. That's not true. Others will tell you that the price of your book impacts rankings, that a higher priced book, that the same number of sales of a higher priced book gives you a higher ranking than a lower priced book. That's not true. It's units sold. Also, if a book is in Kindle Unlimited and is eligible for borrows, that impacts rankings. And I'm not going to comment on that because I don't know exactly how that works, other than to say, generally speaking, one borrow is going to give you about the same ranking impact as a single sale. But I don't know that that's precisely the same. So look at rankings over the course of a few days. And if a small press has a bunch of authors whose rankings are 200,000, 300,000, down to 1 million or worse, and that's holding steady, yeah, it sounds like that publisher isn't really doing anything for you. So understand what these rankings mean and take that into consideration when you're making your evaluation. Another thing to consider is that outside of that top echelon of small independent presses, most small presses really aren't held in any higher regard by professional organizations or book reviewers or organizations bestowing awards than they would regard someone who is publishing him or herself, as long as that person is doing a good job of it. So, there might be a little more prestige, but probably not a whole lot. Now let's talk about indie publishing. Now, once again, terms can vary depending on who's doing the definition. Some people consider indie publishing to be anything outside of corporate publishing. For the sake of this podcast, we're going to say that indie publishing is self-publishing, is you being the point person and either doing it all yourself or hiring people to do it for you. But again, you're in charge and responsible for all of it. Advantages of indie publishing begin with the fact that you're in complete control. This is your career, your life, your project. It's all you. You receive the largest potential cut of royalties. You're going to get, say with Amazon, as long as you price between $2.99 and $9.99, you'll get 70% minus a small file fee depending on the size of your file. With other ebook publishers, it's usually 60%. Audiobooks, it's a little different if you go through ACX or a site like Scribble. You're going to get the largest potential flat royalty rate, the largest cut when you're doing it yourself. And I love the math of independent publishing because if you are a corporate published author, let's say you've got an audience of 5,000 hardcore fans who buy your books right away, and then the backlist sales trickle in, you're not making much money at all. That's very, very little money. But if you're an independently published author, you've got 5,000 hardcore fans. Let's say you price your book at $3.99 and you write 2 books a year. You're roughly going to get $5.60 times 5,000. So what's that? $28,000. And then if you do that every year, you get the sales trickle in from the backlist, from the people who are taking a chance on you, and it multiplies. It snowballs. Doesn't take long to make a living as an indie if you can build that modest core audience. But that same core audience will not support you in corporate publishing. Over the course of the Indie Publishing Success Workshop episodes, we'll talk about how you can get to that point and how you can build your audience, because that's tough to do. But the math works if you can get there. I also love the flexibility that comes with indie publishing. Book covers not selling the book? Try a new one. Product description doesn't seem to be working? Try a new one. Advertising strategies. Pricing. Maybe there are mistakes in the book. You could go in and change it. Now, it's a little tougher and more expensive. Let's say you've put out an audiobook through ACX and you want to make major changes. It can be done, but you're going to have to probably pay your producer to re-narrate those things for you and then jump through some hoops to get the new files republished. But otherwise, if you're doing print-on-demand paperback and ebook, super easy to change those. So you can be flexible in that way. You can also be flexible and move quickly in your marketing strategies. You're following marketing forums or just independent publishing forums, and you hear about a strategy that works or that is worth trying. You can just do it. You don't have to try to convince your publisher to try it. It's all on you, and you can do it quickly. You can always adapt. You can always change. You can seize on any opportunity in a way that's going to be much tougher if someone else is publishing your work. In a lot of publishing houses, if you have a good relationship with the publisher and they're willing to try new things, you can approximate that. But it's great when you're on your own doing it and you can make your own decisions. Price control is also a consideration. Basic economics. Set a lower price, sell more units. Set a higher price, sell fewer units, but make more per unit. You can experiment with your prices in order to maximize that, but also, if you put a nice professional looking indie book out there, which at first glance at the thumbnail on Amazon, Google Play, Nook, Kobo, wherever, iBooks, looks like a corporately published book, you've got a snappy product description, the average reader doesn't know the difference and doesn't care, but they're going to see, okay, I can read this cool looking adventure story for $4.99, or I can read this other cool adventure story that's $9.99 or more. Many publishers will actually set the ebook at a very high price because they think that encourages people to buy a hardcover instead. So we can price well below what a corporate publisher prices and still make a much larger royalty than their author will. So that's a great opportunity. Sales reporting is great. With just about every vendor I deal with, I get daily sales reports and monthly payments. I know that for some reason Smashwords still pays quarterly. I have no idea why, because I don't know that anyone else I deal with doesn't pay monthly. All the different ebook distributors, audiobooks through ACX, all these places pay monthly, which is great because you can get a steady income. It's very difficult to budget if you're only being paid quarterly. And even then, a lot of publishers are not very consistent about following that quarterly schedule. So it's great to get your daily reports and your monthly payments. And also, those daily data reports, it can be bad if you agonize over them too much, but it can provide excellent data so you can evaluate what strategies work and what are not. You try a newsletter, you try a pricing strategy, you try a Facebook ad, and you can see almost in real time whether it made any difference. Disadvantages. We said that one of the advantages is that you're in complete control. Well, the biggest disadvantage is that you're in complete control because, frankly, a lot of people don't have any business being in charge of their own publishing careers. So you need to know what you're doing or learn fast. Keep learning. Keep tabs on what's changing, and also surround yourself with good people who can help you. The next is something we mentioned in the first episode, Menno's Paradox. We don't know what we don't know. It won't take a lot of searching to see that many indie authors have no idea that their writing is bad. They have no idea that their book is riddled with errors. They don't know that their book cover is ridiculous. Go to lousybookcovers.com and check out some of the stuff that people put out with the belief that it's perfectly good. They don't know that their business practices, that the way they're conducting themselves in public, that their pricing and marketing strategies or lack thereof are killing them. A lot of people don't need to be publishing themselves. Another disadvantage is that while, yes, it's potentially very lucrative, you get the maximum royalties, all the financial burden is on you. The burden for cover art, for editing, formatting, whatever you can't do yourself or shouldn't do yourself, and then associated costs. Some places will charge you, actually maybe only Lightning Source will charge you an upfront fee for publishing your paperback. And we'll break those down when we talk about your indie decisions. But if there are some fees involved in getting started, you have to bear all of those burdens. And let's remember that indie publishing is very hard work if you're going to take it seriously. And it's not just about being the best writer you can be and doing the best job of publishing a quality book. It's about keeping up with the market, trying strategies, tracking data, audience engagement. Any facet of publishing is something you're going to be responsible for, and if you want to do it well, you've got to stay on top of it. Being a successful indie author means you've got to have a good work ethic. You've got to be self-aware, and we all struggle to evaluate ourselves honestly, but many of us are much better at it than others. Or the ability to get feedback, honest feedback from people who actually know what the heck they're talking about. If your only honest feedback is coming from people who love whatever you do no matter what, that's not helpful. I think it's important to have a reasonable standard of emotional and mental health to be an indie author. Yeah, I think this is a career that draws a lot of depressed people, a lot of people with social anxiety issues, a lot of people who really love the idea of hiding in a room and working. I struggle with depression and anxiety. I take medication for it. But fortunately, I handle it well. I had years of counseling. I've developed good habits. I take my medication. I do things to take care of myself. And I'm a very, very hard worker. That's one of the good things for me about the guilt that comes with depression. It's just enough to give me a boost of productivity, but not enough to cripple me. So if you struggle with those things, develop some good work habits before you go indie and make sure you're going to be able to do it. That's not to chase anybody away, but it's just a reality check that if you really want to do well, it's going to be a lot of hard work, but the rewards are there. Last thing I want to point out is that one path does not necessarily exclude the other. Many authors are hybrids. We talked about how some corporate published authors are supplementing their income with indie books. Some people start by shooting for corporate publication. If they don't get there, they go to one of the other two paths. I would say that if you really, really cherish the dream of being with a big publishing house, go for that first, because indie publishing will always be there as an option for you. And you might, along the way, through the process of trying to find an agent or maybe getting your manuscript looked at, you might get some valuable feedback that will make that book better if you ever indie publish it and make you a better writer. So aim for that if that's your first goal, and then move to one of the others if you don't get there, and keep trying with another book. So I hope this has been helpful as you think about your different paths and possibilities, because right now the publishing world is just teeming with possibilities and many ways that we can reach out and share our stories with readers, which is what it's all about. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.